Story, Colin. Hey, getting a little crazy with football here. This one's a little wacky. Credible NFL reporter on the West Coast for the California Post recently suggested that the 49ers should trade for Maxx Crosby. This gentleman is saying that the 49ers could trade a 27 first, a 28 second, and Mikael Williams to go all in for Maxx
First of
Crosby.
all, it's good to see California Post. Good to see some real journalism in L.A. these days.
I mean, listen, I'm not... okay. Colin, what do we do? Why would the 49ers trade for an edge rusher?
Well, Bosa's getting up there. He gets dinged up. Age. Why not? Maxx Crosby's outside of Myles Garrett. There's an argument he's the second best pass rusher in the sport.
Wait, we both think the Niners could miss the playoffs. There's no way they should trade their number one pick next year. It's insanity.
Maxx Crosby is better than the number one pick next year.
For how long?
Well, 3 years.
Okay, I'll take my number one pick who's going to be great for like 10.
When you go buy a car, I mean, this whole long-term thing, players aren't 401ks. Do you make me better as a team now and next year? Do you give me 2 years of great? Because if you are, I keep my job. I'm not looking 3 and 4 and 5 years down the line.
Kyle Shanahan's job is in trouble? Oh,
well,
I was unaware of that. Look at you. We're starting rumors.
Just this whole thing about, well, how long will it last? Myles Garrett's really good today and tomorrow. I'm good. Is he good in 3 years? I don't know. I know he's going to be unbelievable this year and unbelievable the following. Matt Stafford's going to be great this year and great next year. I don't know what he's going to be in 3 years.
Rams are on the doorstep of the Super Bowl. Are the Niners?
Outside of marriage and parenting, everything is short term.
Well, I don't know. In America, is marriage long term? Are we sure about that?
Yeah, I think it is. Most people.
All right. Let's shift the conversation. Let's not center this on marriage. Let's center it on the San Francisco 49ers. But before I dive in, I want to say this directly to the 49ers faithful. Please, I am asking you, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch this entire video all the way through. When you do that, the viewership numbers climb dramatically, the subscriber count climbs dramatically. And I want to be clear, this is not about chasing metrics. It is not about inflating numbers for the sake of vanity. It is about one thing, being able to keep producing content about the 49ers that people actually want to engage with and talk about. That allows us to keep having the most level-headed, honest, and unbiased conversations possible about this franchise. It genuinely makes a world of difference, and I would be incredibly grateful for your support. Anyway. Snorts, it is genuinely thought-provoking because we all saw what the 49ers accomplished last season, obviously, since it just happened. It was only a few months ago. We are fully aware of the injury list. We are fully aware of all the adversity they had to fight through. And in spite of all of that, they were still in the hunt for the number one seed. We witnessed them take down the Rams. We saw a tightly contested matchup. We saw them handle the Seahawks earlier in the year, but then we also saw a much closer contest with Seattle near the tail end of the schedule. If I recall correctly, I believe that was literally the final game of the regular season. And we also saw them handle the Eagles. Granted, Philadelphia had their own significant issues, but then we also saw them get blown out by the Seahawks. And what I find so fascinating is that eventually, everything caught up with them. The injuries, the wear and tear, all of it finally took its toll. And then they get dismantled by Seattle, and that result feeds this prevailing narrative. See, they were never truly that strong of a team in the first place. Right? People want to say they were never even in the same zip code as the Seahawks. But the reality is, even in an imperfect scenario, they were right there in that game. They were competing for the top seed. Do I personally believe Seattle was the better team? Yes, I do. And again, that holds regardless of the injury situation at that moment, because there were so many different players cycling through that lineup that it became difficult to keep track of exactly where things stood at any given point. I know it is challenging to follow, but many 49ers fans will just say, well, the Seahawks were clearly the best team in the division last season, right? That is just the truth. And that is perfectly fine. That is acceptable. And you can still say, if we had been healthier, if we had been at full strength, we would have been better. Undeniably. That is indisputable. But that is precisely why I say, do not get too caught up in that narrative. Do not get too low. St in that discussion, because honestly, it is irrelevant. However, that perception still lingers, that they were miles behind, regardless of injuries, regardless of whether they were at full capacity or not. And so we begin to downplay what they actually accomplished last year. And I firmly believe that last season was a significant achievement. Now, you cannot replicate that every single year, because someone will point out, look at what Shanahan managed to do with all those injuries. That is remarkable. And then the counterpoint is, yes, but he could not do it in 2020. He had a ton of injuries that year as well, and he could not overcome them. So that is precisely what makes the 2025 campaign even more unique, even more special. Even more noteworthy when you factor in Robert Saleh, right? And Shanahan as well. And Christian McCaffrey. There was a genuine collective rise to the occasion that we rarely see when injuries pile up, whether with the 49ers themselves or with any other franchise entirely. Well-run organizations with elite coaches and elite quarterbacks. So to me, that is why it is perfectly fine just to appreciate what unfolded in 2025. But then you look at this team and you do not think, okay, this is a group that accomplished a lot. Now we are going to be healthier, so we are going to be a better team, a more consistent team, a more resilient team. And there are also moves we can make beyond the draft and standard free agency. There are steps we can take now to improve even further. One of those moves would be acquiring someone like Maxx Crosby. Now, I am a huge fan of Max. I love him. Absolutely love him. Every team should want him on their roster. Every team should want Maxx Crosby. But I am always hesitant when it comes to parting with draft picks. I go back and forth on it constantly. It is much easier for me to surrender draft capital if the player is, say, 25 years old and in the absolute prime of his career, so I do not have to worry about age or decline. In that case, I think, okay, this is perfect. I am more than willing to do that. That is the kind of move you make to land an A.J. Brown or a Jalen Waddle. In those cases, I say, perfect. I do not care about the cost. But when you start getting into more complicated territory, questions like, how healthy will they be? How many games will they play? What is the specific position? What about the long-term durability? And also, where does your Super Bowl window actually stand? That is the big factor, right? Colin talks about Stafford, for example, and he says he does not care what Stafford looks like a few years from now. And that is because for the Rams, the only thing that matters is what is directly in front of them right now. That is the sole priority. 2029 or whatever does not matter for Los Angeles in the same way it matters for, say, the Las Vegas Raiders. They are on completely different timelines. So you have to determine where the San Francisco 49ers sit on that timeline. Right? Do you feel like you are just one piece away from winning a Super Bowl? If that is the case, then yes, you take a swing like this. I would like to see a move made in a certain way. I would feel more comfortable if it resembled what the Eagles did, where it was not this year's first-round pick, but rather the following year's first-rounder. I would prefer to see if that kind of trade structure is possible. Now, what was the reported asking price? I believe it was a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and then a player. I think that was the framework. Clears throat, that is not the worst deal in the world, but then again, I also assume, and I am not going to get too caught up in hypotheticals, but I assume it would be next year's first and second. So you lose your first-round and second-round picks. That, I do not like. That does not sit well with me. It is not like I feel this roster is so stacked that you can afford to absorb that kind of loss. Or that I would feel comfortable with that. So that is why, if I am looking at this made-up timeline and this made-up Super Bowl window that we always try to define for any team at any given moment, I would try to find a similar structure to the A.J. Brown trade. Where it is like, I will give you a first-rounder in, what would it be? 2028, I guess? I will give you a first-round pick for 2028. And maybe a second and a third, or something along those lines. But again, everyone always throws out these SPE. Civic trade packages, and it is like, how do you actually know what something is worth? Nobody truly knows. It is all speculative. It absolutely is. You can plug it into your formulas and trade calculators all you want, but it is all guesswork. But that is what I would try to push for. I mean, think about the 49ers and think about the Patriots. The Patriots believe that A.J. Brown will have an enormous impact not only on their offense but also on the development of their franchise quarterback. And we saw the capital they gave up. I know it is a different position. I understand all of that. But the financial compensation is more similar than many other positions, right? It is not like comparing it to a safety or a quarterback. So it is in a similar range, relatively speaking. It is not a tight end or a running back. So that puts it in a certain context. The Patriots essentially said, this guy is going to have a massive impact on our team, and this is what we were willing to give up for him. You could probably argue that Maxx Crosby would technically have less of an impact than a number one wide receiver for your superstar quarterback. He will make a huge difference on defense, but then you have to get into the whole discussion about how important edge rushers really are. This is where Colin always amuses me, because he used to say, edge rushers are overrated. Do not pay them. Blah blah blah. But then when it comes to Maxx Crosby and Myles Garrett, he says, yeah, let's do it. When it is time for one of them to go to the Rams, he is all in. But he would also say Myles Garrett is elite, and look at the Cleveland Browns, they go nowhere. Therefore, do not do it. That is why he made the argument not to pay Micah Parsons, right? I have made videos on that topic. And I have always countered that by saying you cannot look at it through that narrow lens. But that does not mean there is zero truth to it. And it is an allocation of resources. Right? The way I like to think about it is this: Maxx Crosby is a superstar. He is elite. He is special. Snorts, if you could get a superstar, if you had to choose between Justin Jefferson right now and Maxx Crosby, who would you rather have? Like, you know? That kind of answers a lot of those questions right there. And so you have to ask, what are you willing to give up? What is available in next year's draft? Is there a potential superstar waiting there, whether it be a receiver, a defensive back, or something else, that you could have as the foundation of your team for the next 5, 6, 7, 8+ years? You would only be willing to forego that if you truly believe you can win a Super Bowl within the next couple of years. And you genuinely believe that Maxx Crosby is going to make a major difference for your team over that period. That is what made the Eagles' trade for A.J. Brown back in 2022 so compelling. The capital they gave up was relevant to the player they were getting, the impact he would have. And the fact that you are getting prime years, 4 years of elite production. So it is a slightly different kind of trade. The same logic applies even if you were not looking at giving up draft capital and were simply spending money on a player. Money can be manipulated because you can always use void years, you can take on dead cap. Everyone always assumes dead cap will crush you, but that is not the case. The best teams consistently carry more dead cap than people realize. It is just the cost of making moves, taking swings, and paying for it down the line a little bit. But even when the Eagles won their Super Bowl in 2024, and when they made it to the Super Bowl in 2022, they were near the top of the league in dead cap. So you can always make it work. But when you have to give up draft capital on top of dealing with dead cap money, that is where draft capital becomes absolutely critical. Because you need to get production out of players that you are not necessarily paying big money to. So that is why I say the timeline matters more than anything else. And to me, the 49ers, whether it is this year, next year, or 5 years from now, should be focused on building a truly dominant force. Not just taking another swing, not just trying to be competitive. You are the 49ers. You have been close for the last decade or so, right? Something around that timeline. You have not been able to close the deal. You have potentially been leapfrogged by multiple teams now. Not potentially, the Rams have won a Super Bowl, the Seahawks have won a Super Bowl, and they are in your own division. I think we are safe with Arizona. I am not convinced the Cardinals are going to leapfrog you. But the Eagles leapfrogged you, they won the Super Bowl. So I think it is important to look around and ask, what do we need to build? How do we get back to being a consistent, perennial, elite team year after year? And how do we finally get over this hump? How do we finally bring it home? That might mean taking a swing like this, or it might mean being patient. And having to recycle this roster. Having to establish a new foundation of young, ascending, healthy talent. And it all depends on where you are. But they went out and got someone like Mike Evans, right? And we know Christian McCaffrey is not going to have 8 more years in him. So that is where you have to figure things out. And Kittle as well. So the question is there one last push? This is where I would be willing to pay all the money necessary for Maxx Crosby. If he were a free agent and you had to overpay him slightly, I would say, I do not care. Again, I will deal with dead cap and all those repercussions later. I will add void years, I will front the money, I do not care. I would be all about that. But I would still, very strongly, want to keep my draft capital. When I look at Mike Evans, when I look at Kittle, when I look at Christian McCaffrey, I look at them and say, I want that draft capital. So that is why WH. At the Ravens ended up doing, paying for their own player rather than giving up 2 first-round picks, which was originally the ask for Myles Garrett, makes so much more sense. I would rather pay more money for the player and keep the draft picks. I like draft capital. I like having those selections. Unless it is a situation like the Broncos, where they said, we need a receiver right now. We are not going to get a receiver as good as Waddle in the first round. So here is our first-round pick. That is a clean, simple, easy decision. Immediate impact, must have moved to develop a more functional, more consistent offense. That makes perfect sense to me. So there are always going to be exceptions and some leeway. That is why, for me, there are no hard and fast rules in this type of conversation. Colin always tries to come up with specific edicts, never do this. Never do that. Do not pay an edge rusher. Do not pay a receiver. Except when he says you should. And then it is like, wait a second. And now he is saying, I do not care about the future. If it makes your team better right now, then you do it. And it depends. It depends on where you are. It depends on what you think you can achieve. And this is where it all comes down to. Ultimately, you have to trust the franchise. You have to trust the organization. You have to trust the powers that be. You have to trust Shanahan's honest evaluation because fans will feel one way, executives will feel another, owners will feel another. You have to look at your team and ask, is this a Super Bowl winning team? Are we right there? And if not, how far away are we? That is the real analysis. That is the conclusion you have to reach. And the only thing I will say is that you can have your opinions, I can have mine. In this specific situation, we are on the outside looking in. Because we do not truly know the talent. We do not truly know the health. We do not truly know. Some of the new draft picks, some of the free agents, we do not truly know what is possible. That is why Shanahan is getting paid all that money, right? That is why he is on the field watching and assessing. And even though every single year all the fans say, we can win the Super Bowl, I promise you, any honest, grounded coach knows. Even mature players who have been around the block know when a team can do it and when it cannot. They know when they are close. They know when they are on the cusp, and they know when it is one of those seasons where anything can happen, because that is just the nature of the league right now. And especially in football, because you are always one injury away. Everyone could believe in the Rams and think they are stacked, but Stafford could get banged up in August and miss half the season. Obviously everyone knows that. The 49ers certainly know that. So you always have that awareness. But you are not going into a season thinking, hey, we could be good if some other teams get banged up and we stay healthy. So WH. That is the honest evaluation of this team and what they can accomplish. That is where you start with a move like this more than anything. But at the end of the day, if you have Maxx Crosby on your roster, you will be a better team. You will be significantly better. And he will fit in that locker room, he will fit in that culture. And as long as he stays healthy, he will succeed and perform. That is also a factor that can be weighed against what you would be giving up. I would love to see if there is a way to rework a deal like that, free up more money, and make the draft capital burden a little lighter, if that is possible. Those are just my thoughts. I would absolutely love to hear yours. What do you all think about the San Francisco 49ers potentially making a push for none other than Maxx Crosby? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single comment, whether you agree or disagree. Either way, let us get into some discussions, let us get into some debates, but ultimately, let us just have some fun. Please do consider subscribing. We are building an amazing community here. I would absolutely love to see you be part of it. I want to build something we all feel connected to. Something we are truly excited to be part of. I think we are well on our way. Please do not forget to give this video a thumbs up, it really helps with visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.